Mia Harper had always believed in doing things by the book. She wasn't the type to stir up trouble or pick unnecessary fights with neighbors, nor was she the type to tolerate someone stepping over her property line, literally or figuratively. She had worked too long and too hard to build the kind of life where she didn't have to answer to anyone but herself. At 48, she was a successful small business owner, dealing in rare and antique musical instruments, a niche market that required both expertise and unshakable reputation. Over the years, Mia had developed a clientele that trusted her with six-figure restorations and sales of vintage grand pianos, rare Stradivarius violins, handcrafted guitars from pre-war Spain, and other items whose value could only be appreciated by a discerning few. With her business thriving, she'd purchased a sizable property on the outskirts of a picturesque but tightly knit suburban community 3 years ago. The land came with a detached industrial-grade storage facility, an old but solid steel-reinforced warehouse originally used by a machinery supplier before the area was rezoned for residential development. While the neighborhood itself fell under the oversight of a homeowners association, Mia's storage facility was explicitly excluded from its jurisdiction. Her legal team had made sure of that before she signed anything. The warehouse sat on its own parcel of land with a separate deed, separate utilities, and a carefully worded set of rights ensuring her full autonomy over its use. That storage facility was not just a convenient place to house her collection of priceless instruments, it was the heart of her operation. Each item was cataloged, insured, and maintained to perfection. Climate-controlled rooms lined with vibration-dampening materials ensured that the centuries-old wood remained stable, the lacquered finishes untarnished by time. When Mia wasn't traveling to meet clients or attend auctions, she was often there, overseeing inspections, preparing shipments, or simply enjoying the quiet reverence of the place. In truth, she valued the storage facility as much as, if not more than, her own home. The neighborhood itself, while outwardly idyllic with its tree-lined streets and well-kept facades, had its tensions. As in any tightly regulated community, there were those who relished the opportunity to impose their will on others under the guise of maintaining standards. Chief among them was Karen Wilcox, recently appointed as chair of the so-called Beautification Committee. Karen had moved in about 18 months ago following her divorce, and from day one, she seemed determined to assert herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed arbiter of right and wrong. She lobbied tirelessly to expand the association's oversight, held frequent committee meetings, and wasn't shy about confronting anyone she thought wasn't properly adhering to the unwritten codes of suburban decorum. Mia had kept her interactions with Karen polite but distant. She had no interest in neighborhood politics, and since her business operated independently of the association's authority, she had little cause to engage with its members. Still, it hadn't escaped Mia's notice that Karen seemed particularly fixated on her storage facility. It began with casual comments at the mailbox, questions about what Mia kept in that big old building, musings about whether it was zoned properly for commercial use. On more than one occasion, Karen had tried to bring the subject up at association meetings, suggesting that the facility was an eyesore and might present unknown risks to the community. Each time, Mia's attorney had swiftly countered with the relevant deeds and exemptions. The storage facility remained off-limits to the association's purview, a legal fact that only seemed to inflame Karen further. It was during one such meeting, held just a few weeks before everything came to a head, that Karen's simmering resentment finally boiled over. The agenda had been routine: discussion of landscaping guidelines, noise complaints, upcoming community events. Then, almost as an afterthought, Karen had raised a motion to establish a new subcommittee dedicated to reviewing all accessory structures within the neighborhood to ensure compliance with modern safety and aesthetic standards. Everyone knew exactly which structure she was referring to. Mia had calmly stood, presented the legal documents confirming her storage facility's exemption, and sat back down without so much as a glance in Karen's direction. The motion had failed to pass by a wide margin, but the look on Karen's face, a brittle smile barely masking her fury, told Mia that the matter was far from over. Mia wasn't naive. She had seen people like Karen before, in business circles and social settings alike. Those who couldn't stand the idea of boundaries they couldn't cross, of someone in their midst who answered to a higher authority than the petty rules of the collective. She had taken steps to reinforce her position, updated the facility's insurance to cover malicious damage, upgraded the perimeter security, and arranged for regular off-site backups of her inventory records. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. In her line of work, one couldn't afford to take unnecessary risks, especially not when dealing with assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. For a few weeks after that meeting, things seemed to settle. Karen limited herself to passive-aggressive remarks during chance encounters, and Mia focused on her work. She had just returned from a trip to Chicago where she'd brokered the sale of a rare 19th-century Viennese fortepiano to a private collector. The deal had gone smoothly, and Mia was looking forward to a few quieter days at home. But as she pulled into her driveway late one Thursday afternoon, she noticed something immediately off. The heavy chain and padlock securing the gate to the storage facility hung at an odd angle, the lock itself replaced by a cheap imitation. Her stomach clenched. She parked and approached cautiously, noting the absence of any official vehicles or personnel. Pinned to the door was a single sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve. The heading read, "Inspection Notice," with a crude signature scrawled beneath the title, Neighborhood Beautification Committee. The document claimed that the facility had been opened for inspection in response to community concerns, and would remain open, pending further review. There was no seal, no legal reference, and no accompanying contact information, just a hastily printed notice taped to her property as though that somehow conferred legitimacy. Mia didn't touch the door. Instead, she walked the perimeter, noting fresh scratches on the metal frame and the telltale signs of forced entry. Boot scuffs, splinters near the lock mechanism. She checked the exterior cameras and found that their feeds had been tampered with, the lenses crudely smeared with some kind of adhesive. But her internal cameras, motion-triggered and discreetly positioned, had captured everything. With practiced calm, Mia retreated to her home office and reviewed the footage. There, in crisp high definition, was Karen Wilcox herself, accompanied by 2 committee members and a local handyman who clearly believed he was performing an authorized task. The footage showed them cutting the original lock, prying the door open, and proceeding to rummage through Mia's meticulously organized inventory under the pretense of inspection. They handled priceless instruments with casual disregard, opening sealed climate-controlled cases and moving crates with bare hands. Worse, they had left boxes and personal items that Mia did not recognize, containers of clothing, miscellaneous household goods, even an old microwave oven, in what appeared to be an attempt to create the impression of unauthorized storage. By the time Mia finished reviewing the footage, any lingering doubt about Karen's intentions had vanished. This wasn't just overreach or incompetence. It was a calculated act of vandalism and reputational sabotage. But Mia didn't let anger cloud her judgment. She knew exactly what needed to be done, and how to do it properly through the right channels. There would be no shouting matches on neighborhood forums, no frantic calls to local police who might be swayed by community biases. No, this would be handled with the same precision and professionalism that defined every aspect of her business. She opened a secure line to her attorney, uploaded the relevant footage and documents, and scheduled an urgent consultation. Simultaneously, she contacted her insurance carrier to initiate a formal claim, ensuring that any financial damages would be meticulously documented and pursued. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Mia sat back in her office chair, reviewing the next steps her legal team had outlined. The road ahead would be neither short nor simple, but that didn't trouble her. She had built her success on patience, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to the principles of ownership and accountability. If Karen Wilcox thought she could bully her way into Mia's affairs without consequence, she was about to learn otherwise. And when the time came to turn the tables, to do so not out of spite but through the rightful exercise of her own property rights, Mia would be ready. Mia Harper knew that in situations like this, acting impulsively was the surest way to lose control of the narrative. Her first call after securing the evidence was not to the police, nor to her neighbors, but to a trusted attorney with whom she had worked for years, Jonathan Marks. Jonathan was a specialist in property law and high-value asset protection, someone whose reputation had been built on quiet victories and ironclad legal strategy. Within the hour, Mia had forwarded him the full video footage, the forged inspection notice, and photos of the damage to her property. By early the next morning, Jonathan had already drafted an initial legal plan. They would proceed on two fronts. First, a formal letter of demand and notice of trespass would be served to Karen Wilcox and the individuals involved, putting them on legal notice of their violations. Second, a comprehensive claim would be submitted to Mia's insurer, initiating the process for professional loss assessment and potential litigation against the perpetrators for damages. What neither Mia nor Jonathan could have predicted was how quickly Karen would escalate the situation once she realized the depth of her mistake. By the end of that same day, the neighborhood's online message board, which Mia rarely visited, was flooded with insinuations and outright lies. Karen, under the guise of community transparency, had posted that the so-called inspection had uncovered potentially hazardous materials and unlicensed commercial activity inside Mia's storage facility. No specifics were given, of course, because there were none to give. But in an age where rumor spreads faster than fact, it didn't take long for whispers to circulate that Mia was somehow endangering the neighborhood. The fact that Mia had operated her business openly and within full legal compliance for years seemed to matter little to those already predisposed to mistrust what they did not understand. Mia remained calm, even as a neighbor with whom she had once been on friendly terms left a clipped voicemail suggesting she clear things up before this got out of hand. She did not respond to these provocations. Instead, she followed Jonathan's guidance to the letter. By Monday morning, formal legal notices had been delivered to Karen and her accomplices via courier, requiring immediate cessation of defamatory statements and offering them an opportunity to respond before further legal action commenced. Simultaneously, a certified adjuster from Mia's insurance company arrived to begin a detailed inventory of damages and anomalies inside the facility. That visit uncovered an even more troubling revelation. The unknown boxes that had been left in her storage space were not simply an amateurish attempt to frame her for clutter or misuse. Several of them contained items that, had they been discovered in an official inspection, could have caused serious reputational damage. Expired chemical cleaning agents, unlabeled containers of unknown liquids, even what appeared to be personal, financial records belonging to someone else. It was clear that Karen, or someone acting on her behalf, had intended not just to disrupt Mia's business, but to create a false narrative that could support legal action to seize or regulate her property. Jonathan, upon reviewing this evidence, adjusted their legal strategy accordingly. They would now prepare for both civil litigation and the possibility of criminal referrals, should the insertion of such materials be construed as an attempt at evidence tampering or malicious framing. Mia's insurance carrier, recognizing the gravity of the situation, assigned an internal investigator to coordinate with Jonathan's team. All of this was done quietly, with no public statements or confrontational gestures from Mia herself. She understood that patience was her greatest weapon in a battle where her adversary thrived on spectacle and gossip. But Karen was not finished. By the following week, she had leveraged her position on the so-called Beautification Committee to call an emergency meeting of the broader neighborhood board. The stated purpose was to address ongoing safety concerns related to accessory structures within the community. Yet again, an unsubtle reference to Mia's storage facility. This time, however, Karen's machinations triggered unintended consequences. Word of the escalating conflict reached members of the board who were more moderate and less inclined to support her personal vendettas. Several of them quietly reached out to Mia or her attorney to express concern about the way things were being handled. At Jonathan's advice, Mia authorized him to prepare a comprehensive packet of documentation to present at the board meeting, including legal opinions, insurance findings, and selected still frames from the internal video footage. She herself would not attend. That was Jonathan's role as her legal representative, but her absence would speak volumes about her professional, non-confrontational approach to the matter. The board meeting proved to be a turning point, though not in the way Karen had anticipated. Jonathan's presentation laid bare the illegality of the so-called inspection and the potential liability facing not only Karen, but any members of the board who might attempt to retroactively endorse her actions. He further informed them that the matter was now under active insurance investigation, and that any further defamatory statements or unauthorized actions could result in additional claims. While no official sanctions were issued at that meeting, several board members began to distance themselves publicly from Karen's efforts. For the first time since the conflict began, the momentum shifted visibly in Mia's favor. But Karen, cornered and unwilling to admit defeat, took one final desperate step. Just days after the board meeting, a second notice appeared, this time slipped under the door of Mia's storage facility in the dead of night. It claimed, falsely, that due to ongoing legal concerns, the facility was being placed under temporary association oversight pending further review. Mia's internal cameras captured the entire incident. Karen herself, accompanied by an unfamiliar individual, trespassing after hours to deliver this fraudulent notice. This latest violation was the last straw. At Jonathan's recommendation, Mia filed a formal police report, not as a reactive gesture, but as a calculated escalation supported by overwhelming evidence. She also instructed Jonathan to begin preparing a civil suit for damages, defamation, and trespass. Meanwhile, the insurance investigation concluded its initial phase. The adjuster's findings confirmed not only the extent of physical and financial damage, but also the deliberate insertion of foreign materials intended to discredit Mia's business. With this validation in hand, Mia and her legal team moved to the next phase of their response. They would conduct a fully legal, highly visible public auction of the unclaimed, unauthorized items left in her facility. By law, items abandoned or placed without consent on private property could be subject to such disposition after proper notice. Notice that Jonathan promptly issued in accordance with state regulations. Notices were posted, certified letters sent, and a date set for the auction, to be conducted openly and professionally with the assistance of a licensed auctioneer. Importantly, this would not be a spectacle but a legal exercise in property rights, one that would both neutralize Karen's false narrative and demonstrate to the entire community that Mia operated within the bounds of the law, unlike those who had sought to undermine her. As preparations for the auction advanced, the tension within the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Karen, sensing the inevitability of the public exposure, scrambled to rally her remaining supporters, but cracks were forming in her coalition. Some who had once echoed her accusations now refused to involve themselves further, wary of the mounting legal consequences. Mia remained outwardly composed, attending to her business and letting the process unfold as her attorney had advised. She understood that this was no longer merely a personal battle. It had become a test case for the very principle of private property rights against the creeping overreach of those who sought control without accountability. And Mia Harper had no intention of losing that fight. As the date of the scheduled auction approached, the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew steadily more tense. What had begun as a petty power play by Karen was now evolving into something larger, something that none of the residents, perhaps not even Mia herself, had fully anticipated. By choosing the route of legal precision and restraint, Mia had forced Karen into a corner, exposing her actions not as a community-minded intervention, but as a blatant violation of property rights. And Karen, in turn, responded the only way she knew, by escalating her campaign in both scope and intensity. In the weeks following the issuance of the auction notices, Karen and her dwindling circle of supporters shifted tactics. Having failed to gain formal backing from the neighborhood board, they began to cultivate a campaign of informal pressure designed to isolate Mia socially and dissuade her from proceeding with the auction. False rumors were seeded with alarming speed. Stories about the supposed danger posed by Mia's storage facility, about illegal substances being cleared out before investigators arrived, about imagined connections to shadowy buyers from out of state. Some neighbors, susceptible to fear or simply uncomfortable with the rising conflict, began to avoid Mia altogether. Others, more emboldened by gossip than fact, started leaving anonymous notes in her mailbox or making veiled comments in passing. Mia remained unmoved. Throughout her career, she had learned that silence and discipline were more powerful than reactive words. But Jonathan recognized the strategic risk posed by this growing undercurrent of hostility. It was not enough for Mia to win in court or before an insurance panel. It was critical that her legal and reputational position remained unimpeachable in the eyes of those who mattered: her clients, business partners, and key members of the local community who respected the rule of law. To that end, Jonathan began coordinating with a trusted public relations advisor, not to wage a counter-campaign, but to ensure that any public-facing statements from Mia's camp were clear, factual, and legally sound. They prepared a concise press release confirming that the auction was being conducted under full legal authority, that all required notices had been issued, and that the items in question were unclaimed materials illegally placed on private property. No more, no less. Meanwhile, Mia's insurance carrier completed its second phase of investigation. Their final report, shared with both Mia and Jonathan, confirmed the original findings and went further, identifying specific risk factors introduced by Karen's tampering. These included damage to climate control systems, improper handling of sensitive instruments, and contamination of designated storage zones with unauthorized materials. The report was damning. It would serve not only as a foundation for Mia's civil claims, but as a potential basis for criminal referral if necessary. Karen, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, made one last overt attempt to disrupt the process. Barely a week before the scheduled auction, she filed a civil complaint in local court seeking an emergency injunction to halt the auction on the grounds that certain items belonged to her and had been mistakenly relocated to Mia's facility. The claim was laughably thin. There was no record of her ever having stored anything on Mia's property, no proof of consent or agreement. Worse, the facility's internal security footage clearly showed Karen herself entering with boxes during the unauthorized inspection. Still, the filing required a response. Jonathan moved swiftly, submitting a detailed opposition brief supported by the insurance findings and video evidence. The presiding judge, after reviewing the submissions, denied the injunction without hearing, noting the absence of credible legal or evidentiary basis for Karen's claims. With that final legal obstacle removed, preparations for the auction continued apace. The auctioneer retained by Mia was a seasoned professional with experience in court-sanctioned sales and asset dispositions. Notices were posted in public venues as required by statute, and certified mail was sent again to Karen and all other parties identified in the investigation. The auction itself would be conducted on Mia's property, adjacent to the storage facility, in accordance with zoning regulations and with appropriate security measures in place to ensure order. Word of these preparations spread quickly through the neighborhood. For some residents, the unfolding events were a source of morbid curiosity. For others, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked zealotry. A few quietly expressed support for Mia, either directly or through intermediaries. Others remained neutral but wary, and a small vocal faction aligned with Karen continued to circulate unfounded claims, insisting that Mia's auction was provocative and unneighborly. Mia, for her part, maintained her focus. Her priority was to see the matter through cleanly, legally, and without unnecessary theatrics. She spent long hours at the facility, overseeing repairs and re-verification of her inventory, ensuring that her legitimate business operations would not be disrupted further. The damage had been significant, both materially and financially, but it was being methodically addressed. More importantly, Mia had strengthened the legal bulwark around her enterprise, leaving no room for future encroachment. In the final days before the auction, Karen made one last desperate move. Late one night, 2 of her remaining allies were caught on Mia's external security cameras attempting to tape new, unauthorized notices to the storage facility and surrounding fence. The notices falsely claimed that the property was under association review, and that pending legal matters prohibited the removal or sale of any items on site. Within hours, Mia's legal team filed an emergency motion documenting the attempted interference and requesting judicial acknowledgement of the ongoing harassment. The judge's response was swift and unequivocal. Any further unauthorized postings or trespass would be grounds for contempt proceedings. The message was clear, but whether Karen would heed it remained to be seen. For Mia, the path forward was now set. The auction would proceed as planned, under the full protection of law. Whatever came next, she was prepared. The battle had shifted beyond petty neighborhood politics. It was now a question of principle, one she intended to defend without compromise. The morning of the auction arrived clear and crisp, the air unusually cool for the season. Mia had risen early, her routine deliberate and calm. She reviewed the final legal documentation one last time, checked in with both Jonathan and the auctioneer, and ensured that the designated staging area outside the storage facility was properly prepared. The auctioneer and his small team arrived shortly thereafter, accompanied by a professional security detail hired specifically for the event, not because Mia anticipated violence, but because prudence dictated preparedness. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood, and by mid-morning a modest crowd had gathered, some genuinely curious, others drawn by the spectacle of what had become the most talked-about property dispute in recent memory. Mia observed them from a respectful distance, her demeanor composed and professional. She had no interest in theatrics. Her goal was simple: to execute her legal rights transparently and decisively. The items to be auctioned were arranged in a neat row, the boxes and containers unlawfully placed in her facility by Karen and her accomplices. Each item had been cataloged in advance, with notices properly posted and documented. The auctioneer began with a brief statement, carefully scripted in consultation with Jonathan, outlining the legal basis for the sale and the provenance of the items as unclaimed property subject to disposition. It was clear, dispassionate, and unassailable. Then the bidding commenced. It was an orderly process, largely symbolic. The items themselves held little real value. Yet the very act of auctioning them sent a clear and public message. Mia was neither intimidated nor willing to allow her rights to be eroded by manipulation or falsehood. As the auction progressed, Karen appeared at the edge of the crowd, her expression a strained mixture of indignation and desperation. For a moment it seemed she might attempt to disrupt the proceedings, but the visible presence of legal counsel and security gave her pause. Instead, she stood rigidly, whispering furiously to 1 or 2 remaining allies. Several neighbors, previously neutral or skeptical, watched her with open disapproval. The tide of public opinion was shifting, and visibly so. Jonathan, standing nearby, monitored the situation closely. He had prepared for this moment with painstaking care, anticipating every legal and procedural contingency. There would be no opportunity for Karen to claim procedural flaws or exploit technicalities. Every requirement had been met, every document properly filed and served. The auction was, in every respect, a textbook exercise in lawful property disposition. As the final items were sold, the crowd slowly dispersed, conversations low but animated. Mia remained outwardly impassive, but inwardly she felt a measured sense of resolve. The auction was not the end of the matter, far from it, but it marked a pivotal moment. The false narrative Karen had attempted to construct had been publicly dismantled, not through argument or confrontation, but through the steady, disciplined application of law and fact. Yet even as the legal victory crystallized, new risks emerged. Jonathan had advised caution. With Karen's legal avenues collapsing, the potential for erratic or retaliatory behavior increased. Indeed, within hours of the auction's conclusion, anonymous emails began circulating among the neighborhood mailing list, rehashing old accusations and introducing new, baseless claims of business irregularities on Mia's part. The origin of these emails was obvious, though unproven. Mia, guided by Jonathan, ignored them publicly while quietly documenting each instance for future legal action if necessary. Meanwhile, the insurance carrier finalized its formal subrogation notice, putting Karen and her associates on official notice of impending claims for recovery of damages paid under Mia's policy. The financial consequences of their actions were now becoming starkly real. Karen's position within the community was eroding rapidly. Several board members who had once tolerated her excesses now sought distance, concerned about liability and reputational harm. A motion was quietly introduced to review and tighten oversight of committee activities, specifically to prevent future overreach of the kind Karen had engineered. Though unstated, the intent was clear: to curtail Karen's influence and prevent a repeat of the debacle. For Mia, the path forward remained clear but challenging. The legal processes would continue. Civil claims, insurance recoveries, possible criminal referrals depending on prosecutorial discretion. Yet the broader battle, the defense of her rights and reputation, had reached a crucial turning point. The events of the auction had demonstrated not only the futility of Karen's campaign, but the strength and resilience of lawful process when wielded with discipline and integrity. And so, as evening fell on a day that had begun under a cloud of tension and uncertainty, Mia allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. There was more to do, much more, but the ground had shifted. The false narratives had been exposed, the legal foundation secured. And in that hard-won clarity, Mia found renewed determination. The fight was not over, but neither was it one she would lose. In the days that followed the auction, the ripple effects across the neighborhood were impossible to ignore. What had once been an undercurrent of tension had now risen to the surface. Conversations at community gatherings grew hushed when Mia entered the room, and the once skeptical looks of her neighbors had begun to shift, some to curiosity, others to cautious respect. The auction had not simply removed the unauthorized items from her property. It had exposed the mechanisms of manipulation at work behind the scenes. Yet, even as Mia remained focused on her business and legal strategy, she understood that Karen's defeat on this front would not end the conflict. It had, in fact, only hardened her opponent's resolve. Karen, humiliated and increasingly isolated, began to lash out in subtler, more insidious ways. The first signs appeared barely 48 hours after the auction. Notices began to circulate through unofficial channels. Poorly formatted flyers slipped under doors and left in mailboxes, warning of pending investigations into unauthorized business operations, and urging residents to contact the appropriate regulatory authorities. The language was vague enough to avoid immediate legal repercussions, but pointed enough to sow doubt among the uninformed. Mia, well aware of the potential reputational risks, immediately alerted Jonathan and the insurance carrier's legal team. Together, they crafted a carefully worded statement, distributed through formal channels, reaffirming Mia's full compliance with all relevant zoning, licensing, and operational regulations. The statement included endorsements from regulatory bodies with which Mia's business had long maintained excellent standing. It was an effective countermeasure, but one that required constant vigilance. Simultaneously, Karen began attempting to leverage other elements of the community infrastructure. She encouraged a small group of sympathetic board members to propose revisions to the neighborhood's bylaws, ostensibly minor amendments related to public safety and community aesthetics, but carefully worded to grant broader authority to oversight committees. While such changes would not retroactively impact Mia's property, the move was a clear attempt to create a future framework for harassment or interference. Jonathan, recognizing the danger, coordinated with other property owners and legal advisors to challenge the proposed revisions. Through a combination of procedural objections and private lobbying, the amendments were stalled pending further review. The effort revealed, however, the extent to which Karen was willing to reshape the very governance of the community to achieve her aims. Meanwhile, Mia's insurance carrier formally initiated subrogation proceedings against Karen and her associates. Demand letters were issued, and the carrier's investigative team began compiling a detailed timeline of events, supported by video evidence, forensic analysis of the tampered security systems, and expert assessments of the damage caused. The potential financial liability facing Karen was now substantial, and the pressure was beginning to show. Witnesses reported increasingly erratic behavior, outbursts at board meetings, heated confrontations with neighbors, and even an incident in which Karen was overheard threatening legal action against members of the board who had failed to support her. Emboldened by the insurance team's findings, Jonathan prepared the next phase of Mia's legal response. A comprehensive civil suit seeking damages for trespass, defamation, interference with business relations, and emotional distress. The suit would name Karen as the primary defendant, but would also include any individuals found to have knowingly participated in the unlawful entry and subsequent campaign of misinformation. The service of the suit was meticulously timed and executed, arriving at Karen's residence on a Monday morning when she was known to be entertaining a small group of supporters. The public delivery of the legal documents sent an unmistakable message. The era of unchecked harassment was over. The filing of the suit triggered a predictable backlash. Karen's remaining allies rallied online and in person, seeking to frame Mia as a litigious aggressor and painting the legal action as an attack on community values. Anonymous online postings intensified, including fabricated reviews of Mia's business and attempts to discredit her professional reputation. Jonathan's team moved swiftly, issuing takedown notices and preserving evidence for potential future claims. More troubling, however, was a pattern of low-level harassment that began to emerge. Minor acts of vandalism, late-night noise disturbances near Mia's property, and suspicious vehicles observed loitering in the vicinity of her storage facility. Each incident was documented and reported to the authorities, who, now fully apprised of the broader context, responded with appropriate seriousness. Recognizing the escalation, Mia and Jonathan arranged for enhanced security measures. Surveillance coverage was expanded, including additional external cameras and license plate readers. Access to the storage facility was further restricted, and all entry points were reinforced. Importantly, Mia maintained her public composure, continuing to operate her business with professionalism and refusing to be drawn into public confrontations. Her clients, many of whom were prominent figures in the arts and collectibles world, responded with unwavering support, with several publicly endorsing her integrity and the excellence of her work. Even as the civil litigation advanced, new avenues of liability emerged. The forensic analysis commissioned by Mia's insurance carrier revealed clear evidence that the tampering of her security systems had been deliberate and premeditated, raising the specter of potential criminal charges. Jonathan, after careful consultation with the law enforcement, submitted a formal referral to the district attorney's office, accompanied by a detailed evidentiary packet. While the decision to pursue criminal prosecution would rest with the DA, the weight of the evidence was compelling. Karen, sensing the tightening noose, made a final desperate play. She sought to convene an emergency board meeting with the intent of introducing a motion to censure Mia for conduct unbecoming a community member. The motion, lacking any legitimate foundation, was transparently retaliatory. Nevertheless, it posed a reputational risk that could not be ignored. Jonathan, anticipating the move, prepared a preemptive legal memorandum outlining the potential for liability should the board entertain such an unsupported action. Copies of the memorandum were discreetly circulated to board members and their counsel. The night of the meeting arrived amid palpable tension. The community center was filled to capacity, with residents eager to witness what had become a defining confrontation in the life of the neighborhood. Karen, visibly strained, opened with a rambling statement rehashing old grievances and attempting to paint Mia as a disruptive influence. When the time came for Mia's response, she remained seated, allowing Jonathan to address the assembly on her behalf. His remarks were precise and devastating, methodically dismantling Karen's claims and reminding the board of their fiduciary responsibilities and personal liability exposure. By the conclusion of his presentation, it was clear that the motion would not pass. In fact, several board members moved instead to censure Karen for her conduct and to initiate a review of committee governance procedures. As the meeting adjourned, the mood among the residents was unmistakably changed. While a small faction of Karen's supporters remained defiant, the broader community had begun to coalesce around a recognition of the rule of law and the importance of protecting individual property rights. Mia, ever the consummate professional, returned home without fanfare, her focus unwavering. Yet, even in this moment of progress, vigilance remained essential. Jonathan reminded Mia that while the tide had turned, the legal process was far from complete. The civil suit would proceed, the insurance subrogation claim would advance, and the potential for criminal charges remained under review. Moreover, the underlying dynamics of the community, its governance structures, its susceptibility to manipulation, required continued scrutiny. For Mia, the path forward was clear. She would continue to operate her business with integrity, pursue her legal remedies with diligence, and engage with the community not through spectacle or confrontation, but through the quiet strength of lawful action and principled resolve. The second escalation had been met with equal measure, not through force or bluster, but through unwavering commitment to the values that had guided her from the outset. And in that commitment, Mia found both purpose and peace, knowing that the fight for her rights and for the broader principle of property integrity was a battle worth every ounce of effort required. As the legal wheels continued their deliberate turn, the neighborhood had settled into a wary silence. The spectacle of public board meetings and whispered conversations at mailboxes had given way to an atmosphere of quiet watchfulness. Those who had once fanned the flames of controversy now kept their distance, wary of entangling themselves further. But beneath this outward calm, forces continued to gather momentum, and Mia, ever attuned to the nuances of conflict, sensed that the true culmination of the struggle was approaching. Jonathan's office had been diligent in advancing the civil litigation, and discovery proceedings were now well underway. Depositions had been scheduled, subpoenas issued, and forensic analyses submitted into the official record. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, expert reports, financial assessments, all pointed to a deliberate and coordinated campaign of harassment, defamation, and unlawful interference with Mia's business operations. The insurance carrier's parallel subrogation efforts had also borne fruit. Negotiations with certain parties implicated in the incident, specifically the contractor who had been misled into participating in the unauthorized entry, had resulted in sworn affidavits that further strengthened Mia's position. The potential for criminal prosecution remained under active review by the district attorney's office, with preliminary discussions indicating a strong likelihood of charges related to evidence tampering and malicious property damage. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated into an increasingly defensive posture. Her public appearances grew sporadic, and her once frequent postings on community forums had ceased altogether. Reports from within her shrinking circle suggested that legal counsel had advised her to maintain a low profile in light of the mounting liabilities she faced. Yet even in retreat, the danger remained. Cornered individuals often act irrationally, and Jonathan counseled vigilance. To that end, security measures around Mia's property and storage facility remained fully operational, with real-time monitoring and rapid response protocols in place. The final catalyst came in the form of a pre-trial hearing, scheduled to address key motions in the civil case. Among them was a motion to compel full disclosure of communications and documents related to the so-called inspection and subsequent smear campaign. Jonathan, recognizing the strategic importance of this motion, prepared meticulously. The hearing itself drew considerable attention, with representatives from both the legal and insurance communities observing closely. Mia attended, composed and attentive, her presence a quiet assertion of resolve. The judge, after reviewing the submissions and hearing arguments, granted the motion in full. Karen and her associates were ordered to produce all relevant materials, subject to court oversight and penalties for non-compliance. The impact was immediate. Within days, previously concealed communications began to surface. Emails, text messages, and internal notes that laid bare the calculated nature of the campaign against Mia. References to creating a pretext for regulatory action, discussions of planting materials to raise questions, and instructions to manipulate community narratives all came to light. The documents left no doubt as to intent or culpability. Armed with this trove of evidence, Jonathan prepared a comprehensive pretrial brief that would serve not only to secure judgment in the civil case, but to support the insurance carrier's claims and to provide the district attorney with a foundation for potential criminal indictments. At the same time, the board of the neighborhood association, spurred by the revelations and under pressure from both legal counsel and concerned residents, convened an extraordinary session to address the governance failures that had enabled the debacle. Mia, while not directly involved in the session, monitored developments through trusted contacts. The outcome was decisive. Resolutions were passed to tighten oversight of committee activities, to mandate legal review of proposed regulatory actions, and to censure those whose conduct had brought disrepute upon the association. While Karen's formal removal from her position remained pending due to procedural requirements, her authority was effectively nullified. With the legal and community landscapes thus transformed, the final phase of the civil litigation approached. Jonathan, after consulting with Mia and the insurance carrier, prepared a motion for summary judgment, a legal maneuver seeking a decisive ruling based on the overwhelming weight of evidence. The strategy was sound. The risk of trial unpredictability was mitigated by the strength of the documentary and testimonial record. The hearing on the motion was scheduled, and the legal community once again took notice. Observers recognized the case as a landmark test of property rights and the limits of community association authority. As the hearing date arrived, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Legal professionals, media representatives, and concerned citizens gathered to witness the proceedings. Mia entered quietly, her bearing one of calm determination. Jonathan delivered an argument of clinical precision, presenting the facts with clarity and underscoring the broader implications of the case. Karen's counsel, in contrast, struggled to counter the weight of evidence, resorting to procedural quibbles and appeals to sentiment that found little purchase. The judge, after a thorough review and a measured recitation of findings, granted the motion for summary judgment in full. The ruling affirmed Mia's claims, awarded substantial damages, and imposed injunctive relief to prevent further harassment. Moreover, the judge referred the evidentiary record to the district attorney's office for further review, signaling the potential for criminal proceedings to follow. In the aftermath of the ruling, the community response was swift. Public sentiment, already shifting, now solidified in support of Mia. The association's leadership moved to implement governance reforms, and Karen's influence evaporated entirely. Mia, true to her principles, refrained from public gloating or recrimination. Instead, she issued a simple statement reaffirming her commitment to lawful enterprise and community integrity. Her business continued to thrive, bolstered by the affirmation of her professional standing and the broad respect of her peers. Yet, for Mia, the victory was more than personal. It was a vindication of core principles: the sanctity of property rights, the primacy of lawful process, and the resilience of individual integrity in the face of collective overreach. The path had been arduous, requiring patience, discipline, and unwavering resolve. But in the end, the values she had upheld prevailed, and as she returned to her work, her community, and the quiet pursuit of excellence that had always defined her life, Mia Harper did so with the unshakable knowledge that justice, when pursued with clarity and conviction, could indeed triumph over even the most insidious of adversities. In the weeks following the court's ruling, a distinct transformation settled over the neighborhood. Where once tension and division had simmered beneath the polished veneer of suburban civility, now there was a quiet acknowledgement that boundaries, legal, personal, and ethical, had been reaffirmed. For Mia, the period was one of deliberate reflection and methodical closure. Though the legal victory had been decisive, she understood that true resolution required more than a judgment on paper. It required the restoration of normalcy, the reinforcement of safeguards, and the quiet rebuilding of trust where it could be earned. Her first priority was to see the court's orders fully executed. Jonathan's office worked diligently to ensure that all awarded damages were secured, utilizing every available legal mechanism to guarantee compliance. The insurance carrier proceeded in parallel, pursuing recovery under its subrogation rights with a thoroughness that left little room for maneuver by those responsible. The financial consequences for Karen and her associates were substantial. Accounts were frozen, liens were filed, and structured settlements were negotiated where necessary. The lesson was clear. Actions had consequences, and those who sought to undermine the rights of others would be held accountable. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office advanced its review of the evidentiary record. While the decision to prosecute would ultimately rest with the DA, preliminary indications suggested a strong inclination to pursue charges related to tampering with security systems, malicious property damage, and conspiracy to defraud. Mia remained detached from the criminal process, her focus firmly on the continued operation of her business and the maintenance of her professional standing. She had no desire for personal vengeance, only for the principle of lawful accountability to be upheld. Within the community itself, governance reforms initiated in the wake of the scandal began to take root. The association's bylaws were revised to include stricter oversight of committee actions, mandatory legal review for regulatory proposals, and clear limitations on the scope of authority exercised by individual members. Karen, facing not only legal liabilities but also formal censure by the association, withdrew entirely from public life within the neighborhood. Her former allies, now fractured and disillusioned, offered no meaningful resistance. The structures that had enabled her campaign of harassment were dismantled piece by piece, replaced by renewed commitment to transparency and fairness. For Mia, these developments were welcome but secondary to her primary concern, the integrity of her business and the well-being of her clients. To that end, she undertook a comprehensive review of her operational protocols, implementing enhanced security measures and formalizing contingency plans for future contingencies. The lessons of the ordeal were incorporated not as sources of fear, but as instruments of resilience. Her clients, many of whom had observed the proceedings with keen interest, responded with unwavering loyalty. New business flowed steadily, referrals increased, and the reputation of her enterprise, far from being tarnished, emerged strengthened by her principled conduct. Socially, Mia approached the renewed community dynamic with characteristic discretion. While offers of solidarity and support were extended by many neighbors, some genuine, others motivated by belated recognition of her strength, she chose her engagements carefully. Her preference remained for professional interaction over social entanglement, a stance respected and understood by those who valued integrity over pretense. In the rare moments when the events were discussed, Mia maintained a tone of calm factuality, eschewing triumphalism in favor of reaffirming the importance of lawful process and mutual respect. Privately, however, there was satisfaction. The ordeal had tested her in ways she had not anticipated, demanding reserves of patience, strategic clarity, and emotional discipline. That she had prevailed without compromising her principles was a source of quiet pride. More importantly, the experience had fortified her understanding of the balance between personal rights and communal obligations, a balance too easily distorted when ambition and ideology supersede the rule of law. In time, the scandal receded from daily conversation, supplanted by the rhythms of normal community life. Yet its lessons remained etched in the collective memory, a cautionary tale against the perils of overreach and the enduring power of rightful resistance. For Mia, the path ahead was clear: to continue her work, to guard her hard-won autonomy, and to serve as a quiet example of the strength inherent in lawful conviction. As the seasons turned and the community settled into its renewed equilibrium, Mia stood once more at the threshold of her storage facility. The space, meticulously restored and now fortified against intrusion, remained what it had always been, a sanctuary of craftsmanship, discipline, and integrity. In the soft light of morning, surrounded by the rare instruments she had devoted her life to preserving, Mia Harper allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, not on the battle that had been fought, but on the values that had guided her through it. And with that, she turned to her work once more, knowing that in a world too often swayed by noise and spectacle, there remained enduring strength in patience, precision, and the unwavering pursuit of what is right.